Welcome to Gorillapreneur, the Art of Waging Small Business Warfare podcast, teaching Davids how to defeat Goliaths. Now here's your host, Mark Anthony Peterson.
Welcome back to the podcast for entrepreneurs, startups, and business mavericks. If you're not a maverick, you don't have to go home, but you got to get up out of this podcast. In this podcast, we teach entrepreneurs how to defeat the corporate giant. Just like in the story of David and Goliath, David defeated a much taller and stronger Goliath, not by fighting the giant in hand-to-hand combat, but by using technology. A slingshot. The slingshot allowed the smaller David to attack from a distance that minimized the advantages that Goliath had over the smaller David. My name is Mark Anthony Peterson. I'm a serial entrepreneur, a futurist, and the managing executive at Serial Consulting, a leading small business strategy and technology consulting firm. I'm also the author of the book Gorillapreneur, Small Business Strategy for Davids Wanting to Defeat Goliaths, which is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes. This podcast is brought to you by Serial Consulting. An idea can launch a business, a strategy can take it global. Gorillapreneurs, before I ask you to support the show, I want to tell you how the show is going to be different in 2019. The segment where we called Gorillapreneur News has now moved to another of my podcasts. Gorillapreneur News is now called Gigging News, and it'll be a part of my podcast called Gigging. Gigging, everything and the sharing economy. Find that podcast on Speaker, on Apple iTunes, and any other major podcast platform that you choose to listen to your content on. Please check it out. It's a really cool podcast and dedicated exclusively to talking about the sharing economy. Gorillapreneur will continue forward, and we are going to refine the format to focus exclusively on interviews with entrepreneurs and gorillapreneurs to help each of you learn from their successes and also their failures. The coaching and advice that I give on the Gorillapreneur podcast has been moved to a third podcast called Career Coaching X's and O's. Also find that on Speaker, iTunes, and all other major podcast platforms, and enjoy that as well. We're going to get razor sharp going into 2019 and give you podcasts that are exclusively dedicated to individual topics so that you can consume the content the way you want to consume it. Now, back to Gorillapreneur. Support the show. Like the show. Share the show with your friends. And make sure you check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Gorillapreneur. Today's show is a bonus episode. It's an interview I did with WRFG 89.3 in Atlanta, Georgia, with Heather Gray and Ernest Dunkley. We talk about entrepreneurship, agro-business, Monsanto, political conspiracies, everything that you can imagine an entrepreneur needs to close out the year. Hope you enjoy it, and I'll catch you on the backside of this interview.
And I'm here with co-producer Ernest Dunkley. And Ernest, you're going to introduce and interview our guest. Go for it.
That's right, Heather. I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Anthony Peterson. And Mr. Peterson has written a book that I'm certain very many people in the audience will be very interested in. It's called Gorilla Entrepreneur. How would you pronounce it?
Gorillapreneur.
Gorillapreneur, that's right. A small business strategy for Davids wanting to defeat Goliaths. And this is what it's really about. And that's really the closest we're ever going to get to magic is what Mark is going to speak to us about tonight. And I'm going to get immediately out the way because Mark has a fantastic life that he's lived and he's got a lot of information. And Mark, go for it, please.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Dunkley, for having me on the show. First and foremost, I started talking about this yesterday. We just wrapped up the Selma Business Pitch Contest in Great Selma, Alabama, and it was a terrific event. And all of what you just mentioned in the book and what we try to preach around David's defeating Goliath was the culmination with that event yesterday. Working with young people, trying to show them that entrepreneurship is one of the keys to helping the Black Belt South. And so we had a great time doing that, had some great guests involved, had Mr. Sam Ortega, the Deputy Director from NASA, to come down and give the keynote speech. And then we had a great panel with some real estate executives, local executives, Clyde Richardson, local brokers, come in and tell our young people how to build a real estate empire starting with $1 and building up to $1 million. So it was a great day, and then culminating with teams from Alabama, from Atlanta, teams from Montgomery coming in and pitching their business ideas for a chance to win a $1,000 prize. So it was a great day, only to be topped by coming here to spend time with you today.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And I know you're coming with the proof about that right now, because I'm very interested in your philosophy of entrepreneurship.
Well, my philosophy of entrepreneurship, as it states, guerrillapreneur, and it draws its energy from the civil rights movement. Blacks have always been at the forefront of what we now call the sharing economy. Mm-hmm. Dr. King was one of the pioneers of what I call Uber. Right? He had to manage ride sharing for a year in order to bring a bus line down to its knees. Mm-hmm. The only thing they didn't have was technology underneath it, but they used social organizations, the church. Mm-hmm. They didn't have social media, but they did have social organizations, and those organizations helped them make sure everyone in Montgomery got from A, their home, to B, their work, and back every day in order to keep them from riding that bus.
Right.
Now, if you're telling me that's not a Uber-style pilot that could have been rolled out nationally if they had wanted to, if that was the emphasis of the movement, but it is the beginning of what I call guerrilla entrepreneurship or guerrillapreneur. Right. You had to take what they had and use that shared asset for the benefit of the community in order to solve a social injustice. And what I want to do is point that now towards an economic injustice and try to bring value back to communities that don't have it.
Okay. All right. Now, where do we start with this? We have a lot of young people and a lot of old people, a lot of people that need to find subsistence. And working for yourself has always been a great idea. And these difficult times with the Walmarts taking over and the larger combines like that, it even seems more difficult to get ahead. And how would we go about approaching this very situation that we have today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. There are a lot of different barriers that are limiting individuals' chance to earn a livable wage. And so entrepreneurship, from my perspective, is the great equalizer if you can find the right types of ideas that you can build a business strategy around. And in my opinion, today, more than any other time in history, is a great time to do that. You have the internet, which allows you to sell your services virtually anywhere on the globe, as long as you're the best at that service. You have platforms where you can build a brand overnight, where you couldn't do that 15, 20 years ago, would require millions of dollars to reach hundreds of thousands. Right. Yeah. You can reach hundreds of thousands of people today for a fraction of the cost of building a brand as they did 10, 15 years ago. So you have many of the building blocks needed to build a viable business, as long as you're willing to connect to these drivers or these engines of growth.
Okay. What's an engine of growth?
Well, it's your business model. So let's say you make cheesecakes. Okay. If you made cheesecakes 15 years ago, it would have been hard to build a brand. Today, it's not very hard. With the use of YouTube Facebook, Instagram. You can have any number of video stills, moving stills that can show people what that cheesecake looks like, how it tastes like, how the target audience looks like consuming it.
Right.
And for fractions, fractions, $5, $10, $15, reach 15,000 people within your area of service today with very little cost. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be rocket science. Now that just puts the onus on me at just making the best cheesecake.
Right.
So use those platforms to do that, and then the brand building part, the social media, getting to 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people who follow you. That's an exercise as in anything. It's getting out there and finding the people who like what you like, who do what you do, and interacting with those people as you would offline. And so I am passionate about trying to get young people to first perfect the idea. Because once you have the idea, the tools are here today to sell it.
Right.
So.
Okay. I think we're ready to start.
Okay.
You spoke about earlier your business project that you did very well. Could you let the audience know what it was? Some of the projects that you've entrepreneured. Right.
The last business that we sold was built on this very premise of using shared assets. The business was a biometrics business. We started out with the belief that organizations like eBay and others needed identity verification so that you could sell more expensive items online. So if I wanted to sell a car, I couldn't just list it and have someone trust that it's a real car and that I'm a real person. So we thought, let's build a business that lets people go in and prove they are who they say they are. So they put their fingerprint down or their voice down or their face down as a biometric, and then provide all the other documents, passport, ID, driver's license, and we would store all of that information in a database and allow them, whenever they were going to sell an expensive item, to put their finger down on a reader, and that would say, yes, that is who I am, and the person who would be storing the items in escrow could then know that they are who they say they are.
Okay.
So we started out with that as the idea. Unfortunately, what happened to the country was 9/11. And 9/11 shifted the world in a way where it demanded higher security for a number of sensitive positions. For truck drivers, for teachers, for anyone that needed access to secure areas or secure transactions. And the government said we needed a better, more efficient way to collect fingerprints, get them to the FBI, and get results back to the people who were submitting them. And we looked at our infrastructure, and it could do just that. And we were able to take on the giants, the Lockheeds, the Crossmatch, the big companies who were selling equipment. We didn't want to sell people the systems to collect fingerprints. We wanted to buy them and put them in every UPS store and sell access to the equipment. So we were a sharing economy company before sharing economy was cool.
Okay.
And that's what we did.
You continued to own the machines, you just sort of rented or leased them?
Yeah, we sold it by the transaction. Yeah, so if you needed, one of our customers was Wells Fargo. And whenever any of their people needed to be hired, they would go onto a website, find any one of our machines operating in the Atlanta area or anywhere around the world, register to be fingerprinted, take a barcode receipt into that location, and hand it to one of our users, one of our fingerprint operators, and they would collect the fingerprints and submit them to the FBI. The results would come back, bounce off our servers, and go directly to Wells Fargo.
Okay.
So it was a great business because we were just selling any available capacity in that machine. The same way Uber sells a open seat in a car.
This concept, did you collaborate with someone for it, or did you come up with the concept and then take it to someone who put it together, or was it something that was there that is to say scientifically that you figured out a way to market?
It was a technology that existed. The live scan technology to capture fingerprints existed already in the market. The problem was that the equipment was about the size of this table. And for people at home, this table is about the size of an old school deep freeze that your grandma used to have back in the back of the house. And that cost $100,000 back then, that machine. That was very expensive, and only the biggest organizations could afford it. So everybody else used paper cards. And for anyone that watched the old crime shows and saw people get fingerprinted with ink on paper,
yes,
that's how 90% of the market submitted fingerprints to the FBI. After 9/11, the government said that has to stop. We need results back faster, because mailing those cards to the FBI meant 9 out of 10 times the results came back about 18 weeks later. And after 9/11, when you have to have confirmation that the people who are working in sensitive areas are who they say they are, 18 weeks is way too long to let them run around inside your building. So we've figured the best way to solve that problem was to take these big machines, and instead of selling them one by one, putting them like little Johnny Appleseeds all over the country and letting every organization buy exactly what they need, which is the capacity in it, so they wouldn't have to make a big purchase up front. Right.
Okay. You mentioned Uber a moment ago, and I remember, I believe, is there a story about someone taking that idea to a Shark Tank at one point, and they were turned down?
You have numbers of businesses like Uber, like a FedEx. FedEx was a grad school paper that he got an F on and was told would never work. And the professor even asked the question, who in the world would ever want a package overnight? And so now, billions of dollars later, everybody wants one. Right. So that's one of the things that we wanted to impose or stress to the young people yesterday at the Selma Business Pitch in Selma, Alabama, was there are no bad ideas. If you believe that there is a problem that exists and you have a unique cut on it, even solutions that exist can be improved upon, right? I'm sure the horse and buggy was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But then came along the car with the engine, and people were going, wait a minute, I don't know if that's going to catch on. And it did, and now we don't have any horse and buggies. And we're at the next evolution where people were saying, you know what, you don't really have to own that car anymore. Right? The same question I asked about the fingerprint system, which was, you don't have to own that anymore. Why don't you just buy your capacity from me, and that'll be more efficient. People are saying the same thing about cars. You don't really have to own that car. Why don't you buy the ride and let a system manage that, that solution? Right, exactly. So if I can push young people to think in those terms, the opportunity for entrepreneurship are huge. Right? If I want to have a package delivered, do I have to use UPS? Or can I set up a system that allows people who are going from Atlanta to Montgomery to maybe take a package with them? And there are great companies doing that right now. ZenFast in Ireland just created a crowdsourced delivery company, and they're beating UPS in Ireland. Right? That's not a difficult idea. And it's not a difficult concept to execute. And so I want our young people, particularly in poor and in impoverished communities, to realize, hey, the bar is low now for you to get in the game, but getting in the game means you could walk away with hundreds of millions or billions of dollars if your idea can scale. So we want to teach those types of lessons so that we can get young people building, because genius isn't exclusive. We find it everywhere.
In fact, as I remember, a lot of the inventions were invented by people who really weren't thought of to be very much into that. I mean, to say that it was things that they did on the side or like that. And that doesn't shock me, because people who perform the work are the people who are closest to the problem and the need. And so they are going to be the ones that are 9 times out of 10 going to innovate.
people who are furthest away from the problem or the customer rarely do.
Right.
But we have some great opportunities to that I want to talk about in a future book around some of that genius. People like Garrett Morgan. Now, that guy was a walking inventor. He saw a problem in everything and was able to solve it. Right. This guy solved so many problems. He was one of 2 people in Michigan with a car at the time when they came out and managed to have an accident. So he created the stoplight.
Okay.
And so this guy, there's genius everywhere.
I just want to mention also, as far as geniuses are concerned, George Washington Carver, who is thought of as saving the South. We have Rashid Nuri, organic farmer, on the show a lot, actually every month. But we've talked a lot about George Washington Carver. He was the one who discovered that if crops are rotated, then it's resilient for the crop production in the South. And so it's thought that and it's not just thought, it's true. He saved the South.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, it's interesting though, Mark, because he was close to agriculture. He was involved in agriculture.
Absolutely.
He witnessed, and he was quite the scientist as well, of course. So he understood it all.
Absolutely. And
came up with a solution.
And his distribution system for getting that knowledge out to the community, again, revolutionary.
Absolutely.
Right?
So what was his distribution system?
He packed it up on wagons and took it to the farmers.
Okay.
He
rolling schools.
That whole entity that's been ongoing, actually,
That's right.
with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, going right out to the farmers and teaching, educating.
That's
what
right.
you're talking about.
That's exactly right. So, again, when you look at where the genius has been, you can find ideas that fundamentally transform a lot of what we saw back at the turn of that century. And so I believe that same opportunity exists today for young people to pick up the mantle. George Washington Carver was one of my personal heroes, and actually how I got involved with the Selma Business Pitch Contest was that I spent 3 years at Tuskegee running theirs. And volunteered to do so because George Washington Carver was my personal hero, and all those stories about his inventions and his distribution systems were the catalyst behind what drove me to get involved with the institution. So, absolutely.
That's wonderful. That absolutely makes sense.
Yes.
You're involved in which is, I guess, time after time is called like new thinking. That is to say that I'm certain that Michelangelo and the inventions that he did were very much similar at that time, that he had ideas that no one was thinking about. And I guess if you were his assistant in his studio, you would be privy to an education
right
that no one else would really have had.
Absolutely.
Of coming at the realities of the world around you and reorganizing it and coming up with something that no one else is thinking. And to that end, we need more schools like that, because the schools that we have today are teaching you how to follow what a power source wants you to do.
Right.
And it's not about you thinking outside of that power source.
Right.
They want to contain and hold everything or buy you out instantly.
Right.
So these programs that you do, like I know you do a Shark Tank type thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I think there should be more of that, things to stimulate people that are thinking, to let them realize that their thinking isn't strange.
Right.
And that there's a market for it.
Absolutely. That would be my goal. If I were author blank type rich, I'd be doing these every day, everywhere, because I absolutely think you're right. There's a standard education, and that's what our school system offers. But then I think there is an education that can teach you how to think. And I think we need more of that analytical, starting with a clean sheet of paper and redrawing the world as we see the demands and trends pushing us to rethink it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of young people will surprise you with the way they would approach the world. Because what inhibited us doesn't inhibit them. Right.
That's right.
And so they'll think through solutions and propose answers that we will go, wow, if we put it together.
Thought of that.
That's right. That's right. And what's lacking in most communities is when you get that spark. 2 years ago, a young man at the Selma Business Pitch came in and pitched an idea for small rubber dots that were GPS enabled that you'd put on the bottom of your computer, put inside your clothes, weave into your clothing, put them on your shoes. And he said, I want to sell a service that tracks these items everywhere they go. And people would pay me because they don't want to lose these items. Right. Now, he came in third place, but I stopped him after the show, and I said, you should have come in first place. That's a terrific idea. Now, 3 years later, there's a company called Tile selling just that, and they got $70 million in revenue, and I'm going, this young man should have continued with that.
Right.
Now, he didn't have the funding. He didn't have the resources or the platform or the team behind him to take a very good concept and build a prototype. That, to me, is
very important.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where the drop-off occurs with people who have those kind of ideas because they don't know where that next step is.
Right.
And I saw that in my own life and growing up in Selma. A lot of very good resources. I started my first business cutting grass. Used the money from cutting grass to buy a Sinclair little computer in a bag, and took that to a gentleman by the name of Mr. Paget, who owned a TV and repair shop. You don't see those anymore because we don't repair TVs and radios.
Or air conditioning.
Right. And he set me down at a station much like what we're sitting at here and gave me my very first soldering iron. And we sat there and put that computer together, and we plugged it into a TV, and the hard drive for that was your old tape recorder.
Sure.
Right. So the magnetic tape was how you recorded the transactions off the computer. And I'm sitting there watching this thing work, and my brain is like on fire. I'm like, Mr. Paget, this is it. I said, what if we ordered 10 of these and just made them for people and sold them? He said, that might be a good idea, but who's going to buy a computer? I should have never listened to him. I get to college and hear about this guy named Michael Dell who's doing the exact same thing in his college dorm room, and that could have been me.
That's right. That's right.
So, yes, the ideas and concepts require someone to create that kind of structure, and my life goal is to someday see some of the resources that we have here in Atlanta, like the great fab labs that we have around town that have 3D printers and all sorts of resources, put up in a community like Selma so that those entrepreneurs can get to the point where they have a beta or a minimum viable product that they can sell and get their businesses off the ground. Right.
Sometimes an idea comes across your mind, and like Mark was just saying, and like step on it, do it. Don't let it get away, and then have to say, oh, gee, that's my idea. I could have had that.
Right. Absolutely right. I know for years whenever I would travel and a number of us would have to pick up the coolers, we'd always say, wouldn't it be great if we had wheels on this cooler? Right? And it doesn't always have to be the rocket science idea. It's an enhancement on an existing platform or technology can be worth billions. Right. And so people shouldn't run away from innovations that can make life better as long as you can quantify the value of that enhancement. Then you're one step towards creating a business.
I'm going to jump in here for a moment. I guess I could talk about some personal stuff for just a moment along this line.
Sure.
I'm originally Canadian, and my father brought our family down here when I was very young. But the reason is because he wanted to get some financial resources to look at improving the dental drill, right? So he was teaching dentistry at Emory for a while, but couldn't get the resources he wanted, so he went into private practice. And then when he went into private practice, he was able to get the resources that he needed. So my father tried all these experiments with water and air and different speeds and different metals, and he developed it. He's known as the father of the high-speed drill.
Wow, there you go.
But that's just an example, of someone like my dad, right, who had a vision,
right,
Mark, and like you're talking about so many of these people, and like George Washington Carver and so forth, having a vision. They understood what a difference this could make.
Right, absolutely.
They just kept on.
Right. And I think the thing that I tried to stress yesterday, and I continue to try to stress with a lot of the entrepreneurs, is just that path. Once you get to a minimum viable product, you can't be afraid to try to reach out for help. And that's where we see a lot of our great businesses fail, because they get to that ceiling point where you either break through or fall apart. Mm-hmm. And breaking through many times requires you to rethink the business model, or at least reinvent your infrastructure so that you can scale. And when I examined the problem, and I gave a speech a few years back at the AG Gaston Conference in Birmingham, and at first, the first half of the speech, I may have offended a few people because I said, I don't think the black community needs the government to solve our unemployment problem. When I dug into the numbers, I saw that black businesses don't hire the same number of people that their equivalent white businesses do. We underemploy. And part of that underemployment comes from the fact that we aren't leveraging the same sort of capabilities to give us capacity.
Like banks?
Banks, or just think about the barbershops that may be just within 10 miles of this studio. Mm-hmm. None of them work together to even procure the same items so that they can get cheaper. Right. And if you did that, that means he'd make more profit that he could then turn around, he or she could turn around mm-hmm. and hire another person. We don't take advantage of tax credits. There are great tax credits out there, like the worker training tax credit that pays you to hire someone from an empowerment zone. And they pay you to the tune of almost $11,000 for hiring someone to be on your payroll for around a year. So that sort of benefit to give you the funds, to give you the resources, to give you the capacity to expand and to lower the risk to do so, we don't have enough black entrepreneurs taking advantage of all of those resources.
Right. Well, we're going to change that.
Oh, yeah.
Right now.
Absolutely.
Right.
We're going to absolutely change that. And that's what I try to talk about a lot in my podcast. I bring on entrepreneurs who have succeeded. I bring on some who are failing and trying to succeed. And we try to have a conversation around the ways to rethink the problem and find better answers. So for people who are looking for an instructional podcast, the two I mentioned earlier, Gorillapreneur and Gigging, those are some great podcasts to learn alongside entrepreneurs who are thinking through their problems just as you might.
I'm just curious, Mark. I mean, here you just had this workshop in Selma, Alabama, and elsewhere. I know you're doing this all over. But what's the response of people? Are they becoming engaged? Are they excited about what you're saying in terms of potential? Or what is the response?
I think we get good response. 2 years ago, we had almost 30 teams show up and pitch. This year we had 5 show up and pitch, in part because of the local college, Concordia College, is now closing. So the economic situation in the Black Belt is getting dire. I never thought I'd see the day, because I was a professor at that college, where a 4-year institution would find itself going bankrupt, and this past week they started liquidating all of the computers and TVs in Selma. So that 2 years ago, half the teams, 15 teams that pitched and that were involved with this entrepreneurial discussion, those students are no longer there in town to be a part of that discussion. And that's what motivates me to work twice as hard, because now we're twice as far behind in terms of having the intellectual capacity as well as the financial resources to get some of these ideas to germinate.
I guess we're seeing a lot of people moving. There's been patterns of migrations of black folks leaving the South, right, in the past. I guess the question is, are we seeing that now as well, moving into urban areas? We are. You look at that whole corridor, Montgomery, Tuskegee, Selma. The only part of that corridor that's growing is Montgomery. Over the last 5 years, Tuskegee has lost about 4,000 people. Wow. Selma, about the same. And a good number of the people who have left Selma have moved into the Montgomery area and commute back and forth every day. I think the last I heard it was 5,200 people daily have some sort of commute in and around Selma. So you think about the economic impact of that on a small town. So, yeah, it is. You're seeing some of that.
I do consult to towns around the issue, because if you're going to keep that from happening, you have to have a strategy or a plan just like a business in order to keep people in your town. And part of the workshop we did yesterday, I spent most of my time in my workshop nailing down the 4 or 5 things rural communities can do to prepare themselves for not only population flight, but we got a bigger issue. The bigger issue is automation and robots, because automation and robots are going to decimate the agriculture industry in terms of employment.
Sure.
Driverless tractors, machines that can plant, can pick, right? I mean, everything from strawberries to peaches to whatever it is, to cotton. You got machines that are coming in and going to displace a sizable portion of the labor force. And what are people going to do? And that was the question I left the audience with. What are we going to do? The jobs that are left that people would have escaped to are going to go to. Walmart announced last week they're going to have a robot that can clean the floors and stock the shelf.
Sure.
McDonald's has a kiosk that they're going to put in 14,000 stores next year, which means the people at the counter won't be there anymore. When I was in San Francisco back in September, I went by a restaurant where there is a machine that makes customized hamburgers and can pump 4,000 of those out in a day. So you're going to see a world that has a completely dark kitchen, and dark by I mean there won't need to be any lights because there won't be any humans working in it, fully robotic, a kiosk-driven or app-driven order system, so you won't have people taking the orders. And then when I was out in Seattle, there's a great company, little company called Kiwi, and they have these little small rovers that pull up to these restaurants, collect the food, and deliver it straight to your door. Yeah. And you open it with your phone or your face, and you're the only one that can open it, and they're planning to not only do that for food, they're going to do it for medicine and a lot of other items. So you see it's a brave new world coming, but it's a brave new world where a lot of jobs that we depend on now are going to be displaced. And the communities that are going to be hit the hardest are rural communities. And so I'm saying to everyone in those areas now, let's wave the red flag. We got to get people excited enough to start investing in new ways to participate in the third industrial revolution. We got to get ahead of that curve. And part of getting ahead of that curve is being the entrepreneurs who are building the next set of capabilities. Right. If we don't, then...
Oh, we're kaput?
Right. Absolutely. I know, a little bleak.
That's grim.
I know.
That's very
grim. I heard
grim.
that Whole Foods was planning something similar.
Yeah, so Amazon has Scan and Go, and they're going to bring that to Whole Foods. So Scan and Go allows...
I personally wouldn't go to the store.
I know you're going to run out of places because Walmart's rolling it out too.
I won't go to Walmart either.
You don't have much of a choice.
You don't have after a while, right?
Walking the streets with nothing going on.
Well, I think it's right. You get down to everybody with Scan and Go and delivery robots, and you're going to see that sort of technology just basically rolled out everywhere. And McKinsey put out a study saying that 60% of the jobs, 30% of those jobs have tasks in them that can be fully automated and run by artificial intelligence. So it's not just going to be limited to, retail or to entertainment or to farming. You're talking about the legal profession, the accounting profession, even, many of the white-collar professions that we look at today will have some portion of it taken over by systems or robotics that will rethink the way we look at the world.
Yes, that couldn't be more homeless people.
Well, certainly unless we start with a holistic plan. Bill Gates 2 years ago suggested that we rethink the tax code and start thinking about ways to tax robots. I know that sounds funny, but the way he put it was the companies that make robots need to pay more taxes because our tax code right now it favors hard capital,
right,
and it doesn't favor human capital, and he wants to reverse that so that you have the funds to ease the transition from automation through this third industrial revolution. And I agree with him. There has to be some sort of bridge between this great technology and the next, full entry into this revolution, so that people have time to become part of the workforce, what these new jobs are going to be. Because right now, even some of the best thinkers don't know what some of those new jobs are going to be.
I can see that there's not going to be enough of jobs for everyone. And
well, I think there will be. We just don't know. Oh, yes. The first industrial revolution wiped out 99% of the jobs that were done in the rural communities back when we started getting electricity and the first wave of automation. 99% of the things we used to do, they went away. And then new jobs were created to replace them. Now, those new jobs were created in manufacturing, in urban areas. So you saw that flight that was mentioned earlier. That's why a lot of people left, because we saw machines being able to produce more than humans could. So humans came in and got factory jobs. We'll see another type of revolution like that, where newer jobs will be created, where maybe we're the ones fixing the robots, packing food in the robots, growing the food that'll go into dark kitchens. There may be a lot of other jobs that are created. We just don't know where they all are right now.
Okay. Brave new world.
Brave. brave new world.
So I'm curious, Mark, because you've been talking about the robot evolution.
Right.
So again, I want to ask you, what's been the response with that? I mean,
I think most people, when they heard my talk on this yesterday, were sitting back on their heels, much like we are right now, because a lot of people hadn't heard the news about Walmart, and hearing that Walmart has the plan to scan and go to basically eliminate as many human bodies as they can. Now
I need to step in here, because Walmart's not been great to its workers anyway. A lot of the workers at Walmart are on
some sort of government assistance.
Government assistance.
That's right.
They're not paid adequately.
Right.
They're subsidized by the government.
Absolutely.
Right. So when you think about that in terms of a rural community, they're one of the bigger employers in a rural community.
Yeah.
So that's the frightening aspect of it, is that even though you have a dire situation, when Walmart enters, think about when Walmart transitions to robotics, when they're the major employer in a town like Selma, Alabama.
There's that saying that the first shall become last and the last shall become first and all that. And I know when I was in Africa, what I was impressed with was that these tribal groups, each one of them, though they didn't have much, the people, the one thing that they did have was the land.
Right.
And on the west coast where I was, Nigeria and other places, you could bury people buried their family in the backyard or in the front yard.
Right.
They buried them under the house, Right. I mean, because that was their house, and they were never going to be put off that land. Now, the tax situations, I don't even believe they were paying tax because that was their land. Much the way the Native Americans here are fighting for what is their land, because that land is subsistence. In Africa, if you can't make it in the big city, you can always go back home because there's land and you can grow food. But having talked with Rashid, which is growing food is a wonderful thing, but you got to have the land. And we don't have that here. And this is a country known for moving you off the land and getting rid of you. And that is one thing you can't fake. You've got to have a piece of land that someone can't move you off of.
Well, and it's getting trickier. Companies like Monsanto have put patents on the seeds.
Yeah.
So it's, unless you buy their seeds, it becomes very difficult to produce some of the crops that were traditionally grown on the lands that we're talking about. And they aggressively go after farmers who have tried to find ways around that process. And I've heard of cases where you've had a farmer who didn't use their seeds next to a field with a farmer who did, and because of the potential for cross-pollination, Monsanto sued the farmer who didn't use their seed, saying that the likelihood of you reusing some of your seeds and using some of our technology is high, and it's your burden to prove that you're not using it.
Right.
And, of course, How is a small farmer
going to stop the wind from blowing?
Right. And stand up to Monsanto.
Right.
So that idea of going back to the land is one that I believe in as well.
It would be nice, but it's not possible at this point.
In some parts of the world, probably still.
I mean, in some parts of the world,
but it's going to get more and more difficult.
It's very difficult here, where we have these huge cities where people may not have been connected to any land. They don't have a right to any land.
Right.
And there's some people that never got the 40 acres and the mule.
Right.
And whatever else. And the American Indians that had all the peace treaties broken. I don't see any way around this, unless, Jesus Christ becomes president. Is this going to happen?
Well, I do need to mention that there's huge opposition to Monsanto, and the Africans are also dealing with this, and here in the United States as well.
Right.
We've addressed routinely organic production here, and we're seeing this movement of organically grown food in urban areas in the United States and in so many other parts of the world. So there is resistance to this. And I've talked with all kinds of farmers as well, because that's been my work, working with farmers across the South who have been addressing this issue as well and trying to have some integrity in their crop production. Because what we found is that Monsanto, they never look at the consequences of the seeds they're producing. If they have Roundup Ready soy, then what they found is that there's weed resistance to that Roundup, and so what they do is they produce another entity that has even more chemicals. Well, we can't go on like this.
No, we can't.
But there's been resistance to this,
yes.
I need to say.
And it needs to be continued.
I just need to put that into the mix here.
Right.
And you still got to have the money to buy the expensive organic food.
You have to have the money to.
Yeah, I mean that means you have to have a job somewhere.
But here's
this is where they start.
Right. But here's the exciting part, though, that I've seen come out of that. You've had some of these same ideas that we threw out earlier, sharing economy ideas, come out of this basic problem. There are people in rural communities who are selling access to their land to people in New York. Who are crowdfunding and crowdsourcing the growth of certain crops.
Sure.
And then they pack up a box and ship it to New York for people who want the organic potatoes and the organic greens.
Rashid was doing
that. People are doing it with cows. Yeah. There's a new startup that lets people crowdsource the cow from birth all the way up till its demise, where they get the milk and all the other stuff shipped back out to the people who own shares in that individual cow. So I do think there are ways for people to utilize the platforms that we're talking about.
Oh, there definitely are.
Right, to give us at least a head start in rethinking these problems. So that's the beauty. That's the thing I love about entrepreneurship, is that every time there's a problem, there's a way to solve it. That's right.
And I do want to mention also that as far as agriculture is concerned, black farmers is concerned, that black farmers in the 1990s filed suit against the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It was the largest class action lawsuit ever filed against the U.S. government. So there was more than $1 billion that went out to the black community. It didn't solve all the problems, mind you.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I just wish there was a re-education around wealth building versus having a great job. Because land versus a great job, to me, land wins every time.
Oh, yes.
And we have walked away from wealth chasing jobs and not getting anywhere near away from racism, because racism will follow you wherever you are. And so the opportunity for young people to understand that if you truly want a seat at the table, you have to have capital. You have to have assets. This is capitalism, and so
there we go. That's the important
to participate in capitalism.
Now we've got there's the elephant in the room,
right? And that's my whole drive behind entrepreneurship. I want people to build wealth, because wealth is the key to getting in the room. Wealth is the key to getting at the table. Accumulated, directed wealth is a way to reshape your community. And if we walk away from that, to sell your labor to someone who then has control over all of that, you've lost the game right there. And that's what has happened to a lot of the rural communities and a lot of black farmers. You're absolutely right. Saw it and seeing it in Selma almost every day.
Absolutely. No question.
Mark, thank you so very much.
That was my interview on WRFG FM Radio.
89.3 in Atlanta, Georgia, with Miss Heather Gray and Mr. Ernest Dunkley. I want to thank them for having me on their show, One Piece, and look forward to going back and hopefully answering questions for anyone who may call in to 89.3. Thank you again, Ms. Heather Gray and Mr. Ernest Dunkley. Gorillapreneurs, it's your time now. Like the show. Share the show. Comment on the show. Share the show with a friend. Love the show. Support us. We just had the 5th annual Selma Business Pitch Contest in Selma, Alabama, and awarded a $1,000 prize to the team out of Auburn University that was pitching their business, Snippety Snap, a business that lets you improve the way you take selfies. Ms. Olivia Cook and Ms. Courtney Hahn, 2 PhD students out of Auburn University, pitched and won the top prize. We haven't given up on our goal to open up a fab lab in the Black Belt South in Selma, Alabama. We want to encourage more entrepreneurs to pursue their dreams, invest in their communities, and change the course of history. And we can do it together. I appreciate you being with me this year, growing this podcast, and reaching all corners of the globe. We're going to do even bigger things next year. Gorillapreneurs. Scott Sullivan said it best in episode 7. Be a mace, sharpen those spikes, and remember, if you're not breaking something, your company might be the next thing that gets broken.
Thank you for listening to the Gorillapreneur, the Art of Waging Small Business Warfare podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, you may also enjoy the book Gorillapreneur, Small Business Strategy for Davids Wanting to Defeat Goliaths, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes. Follow Mark Peterson on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Gorillapreneur. Now I want to close with a quote from the great Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu. Victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first, then seek to win. Keep fighting, Gorillapreneurs.